Good morning, good evening, good afternoon in the time-honored COVID era. Welcome to this important webinar. We're focusing on Bangladesh and focusing also on a learning effort on a topic that we see as of critical importance, which is what's happening particularly to girls, but also, of course, to young people and to people more generally, in terms of education in the COVID pandemic. We know from many places that during crises when schools shut, girls tend not to go back. They tend to suffer more domestic violence, and there's quite a bit of evidence of increases in child marriage, among other issues. So this event is centered around a new brief that we will describe that looks particularly at religious dimensions of these very critical problems. To give you some of the standard provisos, this event is being recorded and the video of the event will be available, will be sent to all who registered. But it will also be available on the Berkeley Center WFDD websites. You can raise questions at any point in the Q&A that is at the bottom of your screen. I think those are the critical housekeeping issues. So with that, once again, the focus today is on girls, and we know the critical importance of education of girls may be the single most productive investment that any country and society can make. And that is why we're focusing so sharply on some of the dangers. So Samia, you're sitting in Dhaka, at the BRAC University, where you have multiple roles. I think you're also an anthropologist, and the CVs of our colleagues are on the Berkeley Center website. But Samia, could you situate the situation in Bangladesh, both in terms of what you're seeing and what you know, perhaps even any questions you have, areas that you think we should focus on, and describe it in terms of our partnership and our relationship. So over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Very good morning to you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joining us from wherever you're joining us from. Thank you. I think, Catherine, this is a very, very timely event. Just because, you know, the COVID pandemic, I think, has left a certain kind of impact that we don't see going away very soon, not in the very near future. And it's especially in Bangladesh, which some estimates say that we've had the longest school closure of any place in the world. And the kind of disruption to education, to teachers, and to the learning process that creates. So, you know, the one point is that we're going to have to try to recover some of these losses, but also I think we have to remember that the losses that come to us right now are not coming to us in a vacuum out of the blue. There have been certain education challenges that we've been experiencing in Bangladesh for a while, amidst the many progresses that have been made, notably vis-a-vis girls' education. So Bangladesh, just to give everybody a little bit of a background, Bangladesh has made some significant strides in secondary education and gender parity in secondary education over the past 30 years. And there's been, of course, we've had the government working in partnership with the World Bank, with the Asian Development Bank for various schemes, programs that have allowed that to happen. Yet, Bangladesh is a country where in spite of many progresses, certain challenges remain by way of gender parity. Child marriage remains a big one. And as we think about how to mainstream girls, women, young women in education, these other social, cultural issues or challenges that remain in spite of a lot of development progresses are ones that we must continue to think of. During the COVID times, of course, we've seen that girls have been doubly affected simply because, the public health messaging and then the school closure of girls having to remain home, sheds very critical light on the question of what the home is. And oftentimes we know in very strongly patriarchal societies that, home has a double burden for girls and for women, both by way of domestic work, the extra burden of domestic work, domestic violence, and then, of course, the question of child marriage, which we have seen being exacerbated during the COVID crisis and the school closure. So we've done, Catherine, as you mentioned, our partnership, which is now quite a long partnership, and our work dwells on a bit of research, a bit of policy advocacy, and platform building and dialogue, notably between religious actors and secular actors in development, in the field of development. We've actually done some work on education and to look at how and in what ways education is cohesive in the Bangladeshi landscape. And of course, the question of, or looking at, or trying to assess the issue through gender was a big kind of avenue or window into understanding the question of social cohesion and education. And we find that there are some shortfalls for sure. One is at the governmental level, we try to look at things like access, parity, but oftentimes what we don't look at is content, quality, right? And how to make these public spaces, the spaces of education, sites of education, welcoming to girls, so that they not only have parity in access, but also parity in retention, parity in the pathways that are provided once girls leave secondary schools and enter higher education, once they leave higher education and enter the workforce. So to that end, I think our work, and of course these are shared by various other kinds of research insights, not just from Bangladesh, from all over the world. When we think about education for a developing landscape like Bangladesh, is that where is the solution? One, like I said, is to address and tackle the COVID issue, the COVID crisis, and the education deficit that has happened, but also that builds upon existing fissures that we've already had. So in that, I think it's important that we look at, and I know Mr. Mukesh Rahman is here today, and he will probably shed light on some of the plans that the World Bank has had or is undertaking through the HEAT project. But I think to mainstream or to encourage or to bring girls in remains something that we must do. But also, as we do that, we have to think of how to keep girls in, how not to, in improving access to technology during COVID, post-COVID, could become a boon. Remote learning is something that could really give access to people in remote areas, to girls who oftentimes cannot leave home, girls who have gotten married, willingly or unwillingly, but wish to continue. So I think that the fact that we have now toyed with technology and education, we should think about how to maximize this and what goes into this. So I think in a way, even as we go back to schools and universities, keeping this space alive is probably an important learning that we could come around the table in Bangladesh and discuss, how do we keep this alive? How does this technology become so rampant that it indeed becomes a blessing in the years to come? especially in terms of giving girls greater access. And then I can come back to this, Catherine, because I might be running over time, but I think as we do that, we need to also think about content, quality, methods, teaching, pedagogy, and of not to leave out additional mechanisms of girls being engaged civically within their community through therefore towards their own experiential learning that are also initiatives and things that we can think about as, you know, as we come together to think about sustainable solutions forward.
Just a sentence or two. What's religion got to do with it? I know that's your life's work, but just so for people who are not familiar with some of those dimensions.
Absolutely. What's religion got to do with it? Religion and gender, you know, are always at loggerheads. Okay, and I think the task of many of us that feel very strongly about doing something about this is to think about how religion can play a more productive role. And I think in that dialogue is very important. How do we get faith actors and non-faith actors to understand that this is an important dimension? Of course, in Bangladesh, there's the additional issue of the madrasas, right? It's a very, very important segment of education delivery. It services many, many millions of students. So to leave that whole segment out of the conversation is really not, is just scratching the surface, right, in terms of remedies. So religion has a lot to do with it in terms of how we think about gender norms and priorities. Religion can have quite a bit to do with it if we bring people across the table together to find solutions together.
That's a very provocative and important set of observations that we can come back to. But I'd like to turn now to my colleague, Mukhlis Rahman, who's also in Dhaka and has worked on education issues and for the bank for a long time. I think these are issues that I know are of central concern to the World Bank, but also to the development community at large, the issues that we have on the table of women's education and both what's happening in COVID, but what might be the opportunities as we hopefully emerge. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I think let me start with a 2-3 sentence of background. And you know, the girls' education, how it comes to the limelight in Bangladesh. Date back late 70s, some program undertaken by USAID and an NGO. A base, the NGO name was BASE. That started how girls can be brought into the school. It gone up to the 84. Then a EU project come up, they have done something. And finally, in early 90s, so I did also part of this study, how to bring the girls to school. 1993, the first, I should say, the most important decision was made in Bangladesh, that providing a stipend to only the girls, whoever they are poor or rich, they will receive a stipend from the government. First time introduced in the world. And that actually made miracle. Until 2006, that program gone everywhere. And we have seen from 17% to almost 50% girls are in the school. That's 1:1 is there. And 2010, MDG goal Bangladesh has a seat. So much earlier than any other country. Currently, primary, girls are more than boys. Secondary, girls are more than boys. In tertiary education, it's almost 50%, it's 48. So when I see the girls' education compared to other South Asian countries, Bangladesh is ahead of them. we have undertaken a study on madrasa education. That shows madrasa students are good compared to the general education, are good in math and science. We have tried a project, but however, we could not do that. But we are supporting all the public and private madrasas, those who are registered with the government. Background finish. So I like to say that while you are talking about HEAT project, and bank, we are working globally, and gender is in our now gender tag for every project is key, and its objective is enhancing the leadership of women in higher education. It's not only for Bangladesh, it covers South Asia region. This is the first HD project, human development project. Bank use a lot of jargon. That's my problem. We do. So we are starting with Afghanistan and Bangladesh. We know that what is happening in Afghanistan now, but soon other countries we are expecting to join with us. So in the limelight, Nepal will come up. India, we are working currently informally. India not joined with us formally. Around 40 universities are working with us. We have a network. Afghanistan already there, Sri Lanka will come up. And beyond South Asia, China will be joining with us, especially China Women University. They are already providing support for teachers training. And in Bangladesh, there are 2 women universities. One is we call International University, Asian University for Women, and another one is City University. Sami, I think I'm making it's not city. What is the name of that women university in the old Dhaka?
Central Women's University.
Exactly, Central Women's University. That's 2 women university are part of this HEAT project. And from Nepal, 2 university already working with us informally. So what we are looking, why it is actually so important for the bank? If we look into the employment, and we are taking that access is good, graduation also coming out. But if you look into the job rate, global perspective, South Asia is reducing. Instead of adding more job, women are dropping from the job. Why it is happening? We discovered that from our World Education Report, I think all of you have a copy of that, and clearly identified the areas why it is happening. The opportunities, quality, collaboration, and across that the job ready education is a problem, which include your non-cognitive skills. So that part we have come up, and social stigma. That's one of the thing has come up. So we are working on it, and we are expecting HEAT project just approved by the World Bank. And Afghanistan just completed signing of the financing agreement. Without signing the financing agreement, we can start implementation. Bangladesh yet to sign the financing agreement. We're expecting by next month, a financing agreement is signed, then Bangladesh and Afghanistan will start implementation initially, which will be the regional part. And we're expecting there will be a lot of activities will come up for helping the higher education graduates, especially women, because we are going to support, provide stipend or a scholarship for students, though for women students enrolling in Asian University for Women and other universities coming from mainly Afghanistan starting, and down to the line other countries will also join. That's the regional, is a two component, one regional, another national. If we look at the national component is a follow-up of our earlier project. which we call Higher Education Quality Enhancement Project. That project actually made milestone in the country. Many things happened. I will highlight later on, but those are the previous things. But what we are going to do here, there will be employability index will be there. Women will get special support, and we like to see STEM education is more, and research and innovation is taking place. That's the HEAT broad summary. It will have COVID response for both the countries. At the same time, whole South Asia will receive support and from this project. And you are talking about technology. Our previous project, HEAT, has established Bangladesh Research and Education Network. Until COVID, only 39 public university and a few private university are member. Now all public private universities become member, which I could not do 9 years. It has happened in 3 months. So COVID has some blessings for using technology for education, especially higher education. And you know that around every country is there. A research and education network is there. And now even BRAC University also member of BDREN. And what we are thinking that this project will further enhance the capacity and which will reach up to the Bangladesh has 2 tiers of higher education. One is university, another is colleges. It's a British system. So the colleges are under the National University. It has actually 70% of the higher education students are in colleges under the National University.
Could you say that again? What was that figure again?
70% and 30%.
Oh, that are what in quarantine, did you say?
Say it is around 4.5 million students in higher education. So of which more than 70% in National University and Open University. And rest are coming up to the public and private university.
I see.
So that's the situation. So we are expecting to reach, provide digital support for all the public and private universities and the 2 tiers of higher education. And currently we have another project, which also I am leading, which is called College Education Development Project. So we are providing technology support there through BDREN. So we hope, but BDREN is providing connectivity mainly. The content, digital content, yet to be made. So what we are planning that during first phase, Kent State University provided us support for establishing the BDREN connectivity. And now we are talking with global all RANs, how to bring the content thingy. APQN is here. We are all the, again, I'm coming up with jargon. Asia Pacific Quality Assurance Network is one. Then Asia Pacific Association of Networks also working on it. And we hope that will happen. And we are also involving South Asia Regional Organization, which we call SARC. And that will be part of this collaboration of this project. So we hope technology will be making a big difference in the higher education sector. And we are actually, look, this most difficult area in this country we are facing for higher education graduates is the soft skills. So I would like to see that global knowledge is used because there is no such curriculum for developing the soft skills. So how we can enhance it, we are looking forward, partnership with many international universities and higher education knowledge houses.
Mhm.
And
Good.
you know that, am I taking longer time? I don't know. Please flag me.
Well, look, why don't we move on to Sarah and then come back to you? Because I have a lot of questions. I'm sure you and Samia also will have much to discuss in terms of both the present crisis that is facing higher education with COVID, but also how that integrates with possibilities for taking advantage of the miracle that you describe to try to deal with the setbacks, but also to look forward. So I'd like to turn to Sarah Thompson, my colleague at the World Faiths Development Dialogue, who prepared the brief document, which really focuses on the COVID impact on the miracle of girls' education in Bangladesh. In other words, the extraordinary progress and some of the immediate risks. And this focuses, it builds on work we've done on the education roles played by religious institutions, both as separate institutions, the madrasas, but also Catholic education and so on, but also the way that religion as a factor in social cohesion is addressed in the public education system. But Sarah, why don't you introduce some of the thinking behind the document that you've just completed?
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Catherine mentioned, I'm the project manager for the Bangladesh Religious Dimensions of Development and Social Cohesion Project at WFDD. And yesterday we just published policy brief that Catherine mentioned, and it's titled Educating Girls and Countering Child Marriage and Opportunities for Faith Engagement. And we really focus on, a brief education profile of Bangladesh. We focus on female madrasas and how, COVID has led to a sharp uptick in child marriage. And as Samia mentioned before, a lot of these issues were existing before COVID, and COVID has only, exacerbated these issues. Already, I think Bangladesh, according to recent numbers, is number four in the world for child marriage. And, that is something that, education has definitely helped lower, but it's still a problem. And we focus on that in the brief. But, COVID has really affected, over 38 million students in Bangladesh, along with 1 million teachers. And as of March 2021, according to UNESCO, and I still believe this holds true, Bangladesh has one of the world's longest full school closures, which is very concerning. But a special lens that we focus on in the brief is the female madrasas. And, madrasas are Islamic institutions. They play a large role in educating a lot of students in Bangladesh, especially in more remote or marginalized areas. And to give a bit of background and context, there are generally two streams of madrasa education. There's the Qawmi madrasas, which are usually more traditional, they're unreformed, and they're largely funded by charity funds and donations. And then the Aliyah madrasas are more mainstream state reformed madrasas that are state supported. And, as I just mentioned, most all schools have closed in Bangladesh, but the Qawmi madrasas, which are the more traditional ones supported by charities and private donors, a lot of them have largely managed to stay open, which has been both good and bad. But we've seen through studies that a lot of parents prefer to send their daughters to the Qawmi madrasas because not only have they stayed open, but they tend to be a more affordable option because they're not having to pay for a lot of materials or a lot of virtual at-home learning tools, such as internet connection, computers, phones, things like that. So that has been a good option for parents. And we see that a lot of parents also like to send them to those schools because they're more conservative. A lot of times it's gender segregated. And it's just been a great option and is catered to a lot of girls when a lot of them have fallen through the cracks due to everything that has been going on. And of course, we have to look at some of the positive and negative sides. And a concern among a lot of education experts is that these madrasas can accentuate some regressive social attitudes among the youth population that they're serving. They can serve to perpetuate a lot of traditional patriarchal gender norms. And a lot of these madrasas, girls there receive kind of extracurricular activities where they're learning proper Islamic etiquette and manners, and that moves toward constructing an ideal woman and a guardian of Islamic virtue and piety. So, and we know that a lot of times textbooks and things youth learn in schools can really reinform gender prejudices. So one of our past reports that WFDD and CPJ worked on was a textbook review where we looked at the content of the textbooks in both secular state schools and then in religious schools like madrasas. And we see that while gender prejudices, of course, prevail in both of these textbooks, secular and religious, the Qawmi Madrasa textbooks particularly tend to propagate a lot of heteronormative gender roles and at a higher rate than other textbooks. And we know that, textbooks definitely reinform social attitudes and can kind of make youth think differently about women and their roles in society. So that's of, particular worry. And then once again, that some are concerned that madrasas can promote, a lot more conservative social norms among students. And also they tend to cater towards conservative families and communities and cater to a lot of their religious preferences. So that's something, we need more studies on and to be looked at. But we offer a lot of recommendations in the policy brief to even during COVID and post-COVID, how secular, policymakers, development actors, NGOs can work towards collaborating with faith communities. Because as Catherine and Samia mentioned, faith plays a large role in society in Bangladesh, and working together towards a common goal is something that's of utmost importance of this project moving forward. So looking towards how things can improve, we talk about how when schools do reopen, waiving school fees, whether for government or religious schools, that has shown it's worked in a lot of post-conflict, post-disaster areas all throughout the world. And one that we mentioned going back to our past work is revising textbooks to be more gender inclusive. So when they're depicted as, harming or being harmful or more aggressive attitudes about women, these, certainly reproduce social constructs and shape worldviews of students. So working with educators and curriculum writers, and even working with faith communities and educators to lobby together for the depiction, the better, more positive depiction of girls and women in school texts could definitely have a big influence. And one of the other reasons we, are looking at the madrasa education is that girls clubs in schools is super important, whether they be in the state schools or the religious schools. They build confidence, they help build capacity of girls. And, post-COVID, this could be girls clubs in schools could be a thing that definitely empowers girls who have either fell behind emotionally or mentally during the pandemic. We definitely know the mental health crisis affecting youth because of school lockdowns and closures. So this could definitely have a really positive impact on girls and their families and parents. And that's something that parents, teachers, and faith leaders could get involved in. And there's evidence that this has worked wonderfully in the past. And one of the other topics of the brief is the uptick in child marriage. So as we know, when girls, fall behind and are dropped out of school, a lot of them tend to not come back. And a lot of them, get married. Child marriage is defined as being married under the age of 18. And this has repercussions for the economy, for girls entering the workforce. And a lot of families do this as a protection mechanism, either for financial reasons, to preserve their honor, to preserve family honor. Food security has a lot to do with it, and oftentimes to protect girls from sexual violence and harassment. And a lot of families and faith leaders fear that when girls are out of school, that they could start, inappropriate early relationships, could, risk becoming pregnant without being married. So a lot of times faith communities of all major world faiths frame it as, early marriage or child marriage could be seen as a prevention strategy to minimize the risk of girls becoming, engaging in behavior that that's deemed inappropriate. So it's a very complex topic, and one that we need to look at from all sides.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I think just to take stock of where we are, and we have quite a few questions coming in, so I think we should turn to those and also have you exchange views among yourselves. First of all, we have the remarkable story of leadership from Bangladesh, which really stands out on a global scale and really underscores the finding from research and evidence that girls' education is profoundly important in changing social norms, as well as in the nation's economic progress, that Bangladesh has had active programs to do this, and that they have involved religious cooperation with religious leaders and communities. And Bangladesh has a substantial state-supported, which Mokhlis emphasized, engagement with at least part of the madrasa schools, as well as with other religious schools. The negative side is that there are still some substantial social issues, and the high rates of child marriage, almost unexpectedly high, and violence against women. Another topic we've looked at is the rape crisis in Bangladesh. So these underlying problems have all been exacerbated and highlighted by the COVID crisis, with Bangladesh having one of the longest experiences of school closure of any country, I think, in the world. So the question is, what's been done to compensate? What are some of the reactions, which include increases in both violence and child marriage? And what opportunities does this suggest looking forward after COVID, which we're all dreaming of? But let me start with a question which Mokhlis answered online, but I think it is a fundamental question linked to what we're saying is there any disparity between girls and boys dropout in primary and secondary education? How much do we know about that? And of course, at the moment, it all looks temporary. I guess girls who are not participating in online education, but how clear is that? And you've answered that the girls dropout is higher, particularly in secondary. But is there, maybe both Samia and Mokhlis could comment on that, because of course it's critical. What's actually happening now? Mokhlis or Samia, whichever one wants to go first.
Okay, I think Samia taking some time. I think COVID in our recent study also shows, my colleague has published a report. I think it is also, you guys used it. So it clearly shows the secondary girls marriage actually increasing. So underage marriage is going on. And there are even violence also, we are finding that it is an increasing trend. And even not only girls in education, this family food actually increased, because normally the men are not at the home. So it's a women domain, home management. Now men also there. So there are unnecessary violence are happening. And even government has to take some kind of social media, how to bring it down. Even that's happened also in India. That's also even this one of the political voice also has come up that don't treat each other properly, otherwise violence will increase. But girls' marriage, underage girls' marriage is increasing trend, and COVID might have further exacerbated it. And in terms of dropout and access, you know, when the government is trying to reach all the students in secondary, even in primary, even in technical education, it's not easy. So reaching to the remote areas is very important. The connectivity is an issue. It cost and the equipment. This is not easy. And even government-owned study does not show it is very encouraging. But government is trying, and World Bank also, we are supporting primary and secondary for developing the digital content, and how government should use a different kind of cloud system so the downloading time will be much less. But while there is no learning management infrastructure, doing these things is not easy. Even many developed countries, they don't have learning management infrastructure. They have learning management system institute to institute, they are doing it. But nationwide learning management infrastructure is a huge investment. And World Bank is actually now supporting learning infrastructure, management infrastructure, and he will finance around $150 million for that, strengthening the BDRN. We hope post-COVID, it will be a blended learning, and reach to the rural will also happen. Over to Samia. I think you like to add.
Yeah, Samia, can I also, I'd like you to sort of say what we know, what we don't know about digital divide, but also about what's going to happen to the girls when these schools open. But we also have a couple of questions that are a different area that I know you and I talk about all the time, which is what's happening to the Rohingya refugees and the education there. I know it's a different issue, and Mukhlis may also have something to say on that, but those are some of the questions coming in.
Thank you, Catherine. Before I go into the question, I just wanted to pick up on something Sarah said, because I think what Mr. Rahman has just told us, that developing a nationwide learning management infrastructure, these things will clearly add a lot of value and direction to how we manage education, right? But Sarah actually ended with the question of girls' clubs. And I know HEAT is looking at higher education. And even there, from the Center for Peace and Justice, we did some work with UN Women a few years ago. And in two universities outside Dhaka, so sort of in peri-urban areas, because we know that Dhaka University has many facilities, Dhaka-based universities, do many things, private universities are slightly more resource rich. But what happens to all these universities outside Dhaka in peri-urban areas where a lot of rural girls actually come, with a lot of aspiration? And we ran a project, and we had sort of empowered the girls to tell us what they need. And interestingly, what they needed was clubs that was going to speak specifically on, lives and aspirations of women, work specifically towards gender equality. So there's literature clubs, there's, science club, the very kind of literacy, numeracy angle that we think about in education, that there has been substantial investment in education already. But these universities said, we don't have a platform from where we can talk about sexual harassment. Or we can talk about the fact that, I return late from tuition for my BCS exams, but my landlord won't let me come back so early. What are some of the ways around these things? So I think, Sarah, just to pick up on Sarah's point, that these clubs, as we think about bolstering higher education and women's role in higher education, so that they indeed have, become leaders in their community and have productive pathways, right, onwards from higher education. I think the importance of these clubs and associations becomes very important, right? One thing is to up how we disseminate education and how we manage that. But again, to come back not just to education content, but to also co-curricular content becomes very, very important. I think I can't state that enough. But Catherine, your other question was, what do we know, what do we not know about?
Well, the questions of the impact of the school closures and the dropouts, and perhaps even the differential impact of the fact that some of the Qawmi madrasas have in fact remained open,
Yes,
though I don't
thank
think
you.
we have
Yeah.
very good information about that.
No, thank you. I think thank you. I was thinking about, that sort of important information being left out. So in terms of when schools open, there's a number of possibilities, that I doubt it will seamlessly go back to what it was. I think if we don't try to manage this and prioritize the reopening of education institutions, I think that is the number one priority right now. I think we run the risk of, a good chunk, a cohort falling off the education treadmill. Simply because it's been too disruptive, it's been too many years, they haven't had access to technology, they can't keep up with the work, and of course there's also substantial decrease in learning quality. So with disrupted access to internet and all of that, how many, I know various girls from marginalized communities, poor communities, who can just check in with their teacher maybe once a week. So I fear that unless we really prioritize reopening and then beef up the reopening with other kinds of measures, technology being one of them, if blended learning indeed is the way forward, which I believe it is, I think we're going to be suffering from substantial losses. Now, we know without COVID, even once early marriage happens, I was actually involved in a project on early marriage and education and madrasa education a couple of years ago. This was funded by the Australians. We know that once early marriage happens, it's very, very difficult for girls to get back on for a variety of reasons, teen pregnancy, so on and so forth, right? So I think that's one thing. The other thing is a lot of Qawmi madrasas actually didn't close because they're not just schools, they're boarding schools in a way, right? That provide boarding and lodging, and whether they remained safe or not in terms of COVID protocol, because our vaccination drive has been slow and sort of staggering. So I suspect they haven't necessarily been vaccinated and safe, yet they remain together and open. So they probably didn't have the kind of learning deficit that schools that were forced to shut down did. However, what we know about madrasa education vis-a-vis gender parity, not vis-a-vis literacy numeracy, because we know, as Mr. Rahman has already told us, they do fairly well in math and English, and we know that they're very disciplined. Oftentimes they become, when they do go on to graduate and get jobs, they're disciplined, they're trustworthy, all of that. We know all of that. But also, girls coming out of madrasas usually end up, and this we know through research, end up becoming madrasa teachers at best. The rest we actually don't know about, right? So, rather than treating this as as something that's a separate segment of a population, this is part of the education landscape. And if we feel that at the level of higher education, they benefit from certain initiatives that bring out women's voices, that collectivize women's voices, and it could be from even a faith perspective, if that's what they're more comfortable with, that's fine. But I think that something, that I think it's worthwhile to assess if those initiatives can be meaningful in the madrasa context as well. Regarding the Rohingya education, the camps have lost access during COVID. It's been various NGOs, INGOs that were working there. It's been difficult to, keep their work going in COVID. We've then in the last couple of months had terrible monsoon and, lack of access to camps, and all of that have been exacerbated. There are various initiatives. Officially, the government, has not allowed education, but of course there were various NGOs that were offering literacy, numeracy, various kinds of clubs, and also thinking about pathways, you know, so that indeed students who were maybe high school level when they entered the camps can have opportunities later. But I think the government has a moratorium on that for now. So it's sort of a little bit stagnant right now.
Well, we have 7 minutes left only. And a
May I
lot
take
of-
just 2
I
minutes?
know I'm going to come to you next, but just let me say what we're going to do. So that we have
Yeah.
7 minutes left. We have a host of very interesting questions. This is clearly a topic people are interested. So I'm going to give each of you time both for Mukhlis to respond to that, to the Rohingya issue, I think, but also any sort of final comments, particularly looking ahead. And we will look at all the questions and see what we can do to figure out how to respond, because we won't be able to do that in 6 minutes. So I will go Mukhlis, Sarah, and then Samia for,
Thank you,
keep in
Catherine.
mind what the time.
I think Rohingya education is all taken up by the government too. World Bank has invested $150 million. Just last June, our one project has completed. And our $500 million is in the pipeline. And those are health and education project and sanitation project. And 200 million in the pipeline now in the final decision in the Prime Minister office. If it is coming up, we are going to provide education also there. So primary and technical skills training we have provided, and BRAC was also one of the participants in that program. In terms of Rohingya education, you know, the political sensitivities are there. We need to consider that how that also be addressed. Over to you.
Okay, but do you have any other comments before we you've looked at the questions and you answered some of them, but are there any points you want to emphasize?
In terms of religion and education, Bangladesh is one of the country in South Asia where religious violence is much less. It's a really, really harmonious society. So how we can nourish this harmonious relationship to upgrade it to educational level and employability, so that the poorer segment of people normally going to the Qaumi madrasas, how we can bring them up to the upper level. I think we need to work together, and even my family also running a Qaumi madrasa. I'm telling you, it's 150 years old. So we exactly know who are the people we are supporting. I am also contributing. This is private financing. And we need to look into how that can be institutionalized. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we agree very much and would love to focus on that. Sarah, do you want to pick up a couple of final comments? I see you've answered some already in the Q&A, but we at least, what are some highlights?
Sure. Something that I wanted to add that we touch on in the brief, that if you'd like to find the brief, by the way, I believe Georgetown's Berkeley Center has commented in the chat for everyone to see if you'd like to follow the link. But another thing that we highlight is that, you know, it's important to focus on hiring more female teachers in both madrasas and the government-run public schools. You know, research has showed us that in various countries all over the world that hiring more female teachers and having more female teachers in the classroom is really important for driving girls' education outcomes, especially in more socially conservative areas where, you know, girls may not be able to go to school unless they're female teachers. And, you know, madrasas are typically traditionally male dominated. So I think, you know, presence of female teachers doesn't just serve girls, but can also serve for boys as well, and drive more progressive thinking. So that should be a focus of you know, policymakers and educators as well.
Samia, do you want to pick up any of the questions or any further thoughts in our 3 minutes remaining?
You are muted.
I think for us, the question of working together and actually thinking, I know that Mukhlis bhai, you have lots of great ideas since all of you have, come up with this project together. And I think between various universities, I was actually just responding to a question about girls' clubs, and I'd mentioned the UN Women Peace Cafes that we coordinate from the Center for Peace and Justice at BRAC University. There are some good practices that we also have within the public and the private university setting in Bangladesh. And of course, there are transnational connections that all of us have. Catherine, you and I have. Mr. Mukhlis bhai, you are now liaising with institutions all over the world. So I think, further dialogue, looking at some of the best practices to see how we can learn from each other and how we can mobilize, some of the good ideas, some of the lessons learned further and scale up is probably a good way forward. And of course, going back to the original question, Catherine, that you and I work on, what does religion have to do with it? We can say it has nothing to do with it, but when we are a religiously observant society, and as Mukhlis bhai, you've pointed out, I have family members who patronize madrasas because it's a part of how, it's a part of our culture. It's a part of how we give back to our society. So, that segment also cannot be left out of the conversation when we think about scaling up, when we think about doing things that are for the public good and the greater good of the country. I think we must continue to build these bridges, have these dialogues, these conversations. The more people we can bring around the table to think about, replicate, scale up best practices, the better our chances of being successful at these, issues. Gender parity has been a priority for Bangladesh, and there will always be great initiatives and there will be shortfalls. And I think the fact that you are prioritizing gender in this particular project, and it's notably about gender in education, is a very hopeful step forward. So thank you for that, and thank you, Catherine. I think I've
Well,
summarized
unfortunately, our time is up, and we try to keep these webinars to the time we promise. But thank you all very much for a very interesting discussion. And I am very conscious of the many interesting questions which we will be informed by and which we will reflect on. We are a bit more than midway through a project that gives us the opportunity to reflect on what we know are complex issues of the ways in which the religious beliefs and the religious institutions and the religious divisions and polarizations that are very prominent in Bangladesh, the way that they play into the government's goals and the goals of its many partners. So the education issue is critical, clearly, because of the drama of the COVID emergencies and the disruptions that it has caused far beyond anything we could have imagined a year and a half ago when this began. But we've been quite struck by worldwide data and evidence on how this is causing new dimensions. The digital divide is much more prominent, but other violence against women, the child marriage issue, that those have been accentuated during this crisis. And I think it calls on us to understand a bit better. We know the basics of what's happened, but also where we go looking forward. So to repeat, the video of this event will be shortly on the Berkeley Center website and CPJ, I hope, in Bangladesh. And we will be looking at the questions and seeing what we can do to address specific ones. But I want to emphasize that this is very much a continuing discussion, and Samia's emphasis on cooperation, on the, I call it an all hands job, whether it's COVID vaccination or making up for lost time in education or dealing with some of the violence and the unrest and the polarization that's emerged during the crisis. These are all very much in our sights and in our determination as we look forward. So thank you again, Samia, Mukhlis, Sarah, for very thought-provoking and thoughtful exchange, and look forward to continuing.